Hello, welcome to Product for Product. It's Matt and Moshe here, and today we're going to be summarizing our series on product analytics. We had several conversations on some of the most popular product analytics tools on the market, from Heap, Mixpanel, Pendo, Amplitude. And today we're going to be discussing what we learned, what are some of the takeaways for future research, and hopefully how the market in general is going to improve. This has been a great process for me. This was some of the questions I had coming into it, or what are these tools? What's the differences between them? What are some of the obstacles and advantages of each one of them? So having our guest on was extremely beneficial to me and definitely helped clear up some of the mystery surrounding these tools. I'm excited to wrap the series up and hear what you learned from it, Moshe.
Hi, Matt. This was really a very interesting series, definitely. I think I mentioned it before, but you know how my bias is towards one of those products, just because I've been using it for so many years now. And it's been really interesting. Some of the points that was raised through this series were really interesting. Just a shout out also to our guests that were really helpful for us to learn about these products. So you mentioned that you have a lot of background in data analytics, more from the technical point, right?
Yes, the background more from Power BI, Tableau, more of the tools associated with traditional BI and analytics, more of the visualization tools, Alteryx, and some of the data workflow tools.
Yeah.
So coming from, I've been on a mission to work with data productization with the company I set up, Nimble, and I'm really looking to productize data. And that's what was so fascinating about the product analytics space. This is a really powerful space because you can combine both product and analytics to gain insight into what people are doing, because I think something lacking in the traditional BI and analytics space is the actual understanding of what users are doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think we will need to have one time a series about those type of products, because product managers do use these. I've used in my career Tableau and Power BI and Crystal for many years. So there are definitely things that we still need to use, because even those products that we discussed in the product analytics don't cover everything. It's not a data warehouse that you can get all the data about your product. Is mostly for how people are using it.
Right.
And it's geared towards the specific features that they're using. So you could raise any event in your product and basically see the path that people took. You can see who's using which features. You can see how successful a specific feature is, etc. So just from talking with people that use it in these episodes, do you have a favorite that most impressed you, or are they all about the same?
They all had pros and cons, I guess. I think Amplitude came out as something that I already knew about Amplitude, but speaking with Ken really highlighted its ability to serve the product manager. Maybe it's a tool that's more beneficial for hopping in and getting good insights and then hopping back out to go take action. That was something that I'm really interested in, because, if you spend a lot of time, and as an analyst, you can spend a lot of time working through the data, and that's extremely beneficial. But I think getting to insights and then creating action from those insights, I think that's something that needs to be done more widely. So Amplitude sounded very impressive in being able to do that. Mixpanel as well. Mixpanel sounded like, I liked Jan's point about the user experience. He liked hopping in and was able to get started, with the actual user experience of it. But I guess it did have some implementation along with it. So that was maybe something that may not have been the best thing for some people. So that definitely stood out too.
Yeah, I think that overall, all of these products will give you this type of functionality that once you set it up, and we'll talk about the setup in a second, but once you set up those your features and whichever reports they provide or your own reports, you can get the right usability output, and then from that, find what your insights are. It might be the way that each one of our guests talked about it, I guess.
Yes.
And it might be also a preference. So for sure, it's always important to look deeper into the product. And we always mentioned before that this is audio only, so we can't really show what the product looks like. But it did seem that some of our guests were, excited about the UX, like you said. One thing that really came out to me from these discussions was the question about, am I choosing a product that is only doing that one thing, product analytics, that it's focused only on that? Or am I choosing a product that is doing also other things? So almost like a platform that has different type of features and different functionalities all in one platforms. And I think that there are pros and cons to that. So Pendo, for example, does have quite a bit of other functionalities. So mainly, Andrew was talking about the onboarding guides. So the in-app guides that you can take your user through a specific flow in your application. They also have other main module for features. So people can raise requests for features and vote for features and stuff like that. And the approach that they're taking is really to have a platform that can provide quite a bit of functionality and tie everything together, so you don't really have to integrate with other systems. Where Amplitude and Mixpanel, Amplitude specifically, I think that Ken was talking about how they're really focusing only on product analytics. Mm-hmm. And with Mixpanel, Jan was saying that they had A/B testing and they were taking out A/B testing, I believe. With Heap, I don't remember if there was any other type of functionalities, but I think they're also focusing mainly on product analytics.
It seemed that way. Yeah, it seemed that way.
So it's really a matter of preference there. I can tell you what I prefer, but again, that might be part of my bias. But I had experiences where in one company we were working with 6 or 7 different small applications that each one of them was doing one thing. And then we tried to integrate them, or we had issues integrating them, and it was quite siloed. So there was a lot of problems with that from my perspective. To do one thing, I have to go into one system, and then to do another thing, I have to go to another system, etc. Mm-hmm. So I do prefer the integrated applications that I pay one license, but that license could be quite expensive because it does a lot of things. But I get a very powerful system that give me functionalities that otherwise I will have to buy several different applications.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, mm-hmm. How many tools do you want in your tech stack?
Exactly.
Exactly. Or do you want a platform that does it all? It may not do product analytics to the level that a specialized tool would, but is it good enough to get what you need?
And that's the thing. That's really the thing, that sometimes people would prefer the specialized product because they're saying it does what it does and it does it the best way. So I don't think that the fact that a product focused on one thing means that they do it the best way. I think this is still need to be proven that they do it the best way. They have the chance to do it the best way only because they only focus on that. So usually when you focus on one thing, you are supposed to do it the best way. But, if you look at different products or different industries, there is still a lot of other factors that might mean that they're not doing it the best way. So again, it's all about checking it out and see what can it do and what it cannot do. What I can tell you is that when I was looking at Pendo years ago, the first time I looked at them, I didn't look at them for product analytics. I used Google Analytics at the time, and I didn't even know that this type of products exist that could actually define the features. You can define features in them, and you can associate your analytics with your features rather than with URLs, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's really what Google Analytics was all about. And when I was looking for a product that I would be able to communicate with my users, because I had hard time getting in touch with them because of different reasons at the time. And with the in-app guides that Pendo had, I was able to implement that. But then I saw what they do with analytics, and it really opened my mind to the opportunities over there. And when I learned also how they started, they told me they did start with product analytics. So once they had all the product analytics in place, they were able to add more features like the in-app guides, because it was all integrated. So it's really interesting, how different companies are.
It is
routing their way in there.
And we spoke to a couple of startups. I mean, Dan and Jan were at startup companies. So I'm wondering if that's something that plays into it too. Do you get a specialized tool if you're trying to onboard, not necessarily onboard, but with Pendo does onboarding. So if that's something you're trying to do with your product, if you're a more mature company, I'm wondering if Pendo is something that is more geared to that, or whether, Mixpanel, like, I just want analytics. We're a small company, and maybe Mixpanel and Heap have a better penetration when it comes to a startup.
You're right. That company that I mentioned, that we had like 6 or 7 tools, it was a startup.
Okay.
So as a startup, someone just decided to do one thing, and they went and researched it, and they got the license, and they just started using it. There is not a lot of bureaucracy or process to get the product in place. And that's how it happened, that it was just a hodgepodge of different products. But eventually we did move into Pendo, just because we saw that with one license with Pendo, we could replace all of those other licenses. But yeah, the pricing is a different tier of pricing, and it's quite different. I don't want to sound here like, a Pendo sales guy, because I'm not. I'm not getting any anything for that. It's just I'm just a user, and I did warn everyone that I do have a bias to one of the products because I'm using it. But it doesn't mean that for you it's the right product. You still have to do your own due diligence to look at the product and see what's the best for you.
Yeah.
There was one other thing that really caught my eye when we were talking about the different products, and that was, how do I set it up? And I think there were 2 products that you had to set it up with the help of developers, raising events in your own product. That was with Mixpanel and Amplitude. And 2 products, Pendo and Heap, where you have a type of an interface that anyone that is not a developer but is a user of this app can go and set up those events and features. There are pros and cons for each one of those, methodologies. I think that the pros for the methodology that you have to set it up using developers is, or through the application, your product, is that you do it in a very structured way. Ken was mentioning that usually the developers will not break things. Although I do, I can argue that the developers can break things a lot of times. It really depends on developers. Nothing against developers. I was a developer for many, many years. It's just a matter of if you put the right testing in place to make sure that you didn't break anything. And the systems are so complex sometimes that breaking things is quite easy, actually.
Right.
But the point he was raising over there was that even if they change the name of the element in the application, or they change the whichever way they do that, if it's a CSS or whatever it is. So even if they change the name of the element, it will still raise the element in Amplitude, and I would guess the same thing will be in Mixpanel, because they raise the same element exactly. So nothing breaks when they release a new version. And then also the other things there is that they can have their own naming convention for that and use the same naming convention all over, the same way that they will do naming convention for their variables or their functions in the application. So they would also do a naming convention for that. Again, I would argue on that there could be also different developers creating their own naming convention if it's not structured enough in the organization, etc. So there could be issues with that as well. But it definitely helps the business people or the product managers that are looking at the data, because usually it will definitely be the feature that they're looking at. For sure, they will know this is the one that the event was raised for by the developer. The con for that, I would say, is that you do need to think ahead when you develop every feature. What are the events that you want to raise? So if the feature has a lot of areas that could raise events and you miss something, you will have to add them again by releasing another version of your application and by having a developer working on that. To me, it's a con, because I think that, thinking about things in advance means more of a waterfall mode than an agile mode. And also, I would like the developers to really focus on the core product that we're developing, rather than focusing on functionality around it. That I'm not saying that raising events is, maybe it is part of the core, maybe it is simple to them to do because they could maybe build a function that does it and then just call it from wherever. So it may not be so hard to do, but still let's say I forgot a few features that I want to raise an event. I have to write another story for them. It has to go to the next sprint. So it could take time until I actually start raising this, etc. So there is a process there to go through.
And I'm thinking whether that limits your ability to experiment with stuff too. I mean, is that
right?
If you're a product manager or product analyst and you want to do an A/B test or you want to run an experiment, having to rely on your developers to make changes and make these kind of ad hoc adjustments, that seems like, okay, maybe I shouldn't do the experiment because it's going to take X amount of time to do, to implement and then roll back. So I'm wondering if that's something, if you're in a business that's trying to experiment and do that kind of stuff, whether that's going to be an impediment to you.
Yeah, exactly. So that's for sure things that you want to consider. And I think when we talked about the pros and cons for the other two applications where you can do it through an application that those systems provide rather than through development, it's probably the opposite, pros and cons, right? So, so the pro would be that you can define your elements anytime that you want. So you have an interface where you can look into your application and then you can say this element here on the screen will raise this specific event when someone is using it. And then you can do it. You don't have to think about all of them in advance. You just do it on the fly. It doesn't have to be a developer because they have an interface for it. The cons for that would be that you have different people that are using the system and you still need to define those naming convention for that. I can say from experience that I've seen that in action where different people define different elements and they were using different naming conventions, or they didn't know that someone already defined a feature or an event on a specific element on the screen and they define their own and then you have duplicates. Or I've seen where the developers did change the element name or the CSS and then it broke the feature on the analytics system. Now, to solve that, you do need to set up your naming convention. You might want to set up also specific people that set up those elements, so it's more organized. And you also have to have this type of communication between the developers and the product managers or whoever is setting up your features on the screen to make sure that if they did change something, there is an open communication and they let everyone know, because if you break it, then someone will have to fix it. I can't really speak specifically about Heap because I'm not sure how it's done over there, but I'm sure there is a way to do that. But in Pendo, even if a developer changed the element name or CSS, you could then map it again through the Pendo interface and merge it with the original one that you had. So you don't have to create a new feature. You basically use the previous feature and you just merge them together. And basically, it continues the analytics the way you did before, so you don't lose anything. There is also one more thing that was mentioned when we talked about Pendo, and I don't think any of the other products are doing, which is the way that they build the system, and because it's not a developer that raised the event through the application, but the product manager can do that through the interface, and also the way that they keep the information. You don't have to do it from day one that the feature was released. So let's say we released the feature and we already have the Pendo integration in there. So Pendo started collecting the data. And 6 months after we decided to map that feature and we want to see what the information, the usage of that specific feature, we will get the information from day one. So we will have it from the entire 6 months that users used it. And I think this is really powerful because you don't have to wait for enough data to come in. Where with all the other applications, you do have to do that. I believe that's the case also with Heap, Mixpanel and Amplitude for sure, because the developer has to put the event in there. So if the developer did not put it in the first 6 months, only after 6 months, then you don't have any information from the first 6 months. And then once they put it, you still have to get users to actually use it until you have enough information. So if it's barely used feature, it might take time until people will actually start using it, or you will get your data.
Yeah, that's a great feature that Pendo definitely had compared to the other three we looked at. So yeah, it seemed like all the other three you could not do that. I didn't have that capability.
There is actually one thing that I know that Pendo also do, even if it's not a page event, meaning it's not an element on the screen. You can do all the elements on the screen through their interface, like we said before, but you could also raise events through the application. If there are things that you want to raise that are not explicitly something that happens on the screen, you could still ask your developers to raise that event. So that's a possibility too over there. And then it will behave like any of the other events that the other applications are doing. So for that, of course, you don't have that initial 6 months of data, like in that example we said. It will be only from the time that you raise that event. Cool. So I thought that this is really important points to really mention about this. Any other things that...
I also I was thinking about Ken's conversation about Amplitude, how it sounded as though Amplitude drives insights that you may not have known or thought of or intended to know. It sounded like it gave recommendations or insights that it did it in a way where when you went into the tool, it would kind of recommend saying, hey, check this out, look into this.
Right. And I really like that too. This is, I think, one of those things that a product company that focusing on analytics really can help us, product managers, to learn more about what is available through data and through product data.
Right.
So even if we don't think that specific insights, just because we never thought about this type of insights or we never read about them or learned about them, if they could raise those type of insights to us, I think this is really, really useful from their specific experience. Yeah, I really like that point with Amplitude, and I would raise this to all the companies to try to do as well.
Yeah, because I think that's what allows just someone coming in, not even knowing what they're asking, not even knowing what they're looking for. It really kind of democratizes data and analytics and says, okay, you may not know anything what's going on, but if you come in here, we can start pointing you in directions where, you may find insight, you may have interest, and then that kind of snowballs. And you say, okay, well, this is a really interesting insight that they displayed to me. This brings up further questions. I can create a dashboard, you can get the data and analytics to it, but if you're not knowing what's being asked, if you're not knowing where you want to go with it, you can kind of sit there and spin your wheels sometimes, thinking about what do I need to look at. And so I think that's a really cool feature. I'm curious. I don't think Mixpanel or Heap were necessarily doing that. There may be something in there, but that I don't recall. But yeah, that was something that stood out from the conversation with Ken.
And this is really about being proactive rather than reactive, though I see it.
Yes.
Because when we look at data, and there is sometimes, a lot of data, we can really drown in it sometimes.
Yes.
We always have to ask ourselves why. Why do we do it? Why do we even look at the data? And we look at the data to find insights so we can improve our strategy. We can improve our prioritizations on features. We can find the personas of people that are using our application and maybe pivot towards those type of people so we can find a better product market fit. We can find the success of our features or failure of our features. When we do experimentation, we can find results to hypotheses that we put.
Yes.
So there is a lot of those things that we as product managers need the data for, but we really need sometimes the help to see these things. And it's not always obvious. So a reactive system will just present the data to us, and then we will have to figure out, okay, so now what? Especially if there is a lot of data, there is a lot of dashboards, there is a lot of ways to present the data or things like that, where a more proactive system will actually give us those type of insights that all of us are looking for. I think it is a complex thing to do because each one of our application is different. So if I define the success criteria in a certain way, and you define a success criteria in a different way for your application, then how does a platform like that, can provide both insights for both of us? But at the bottom line, I think there are ways to probably generalize it into, and I think that can actually mention a couple of those examples that Amplitude is doing. So that was really refreshing to hear.
Yeah, it was. And one other point was that Andrew mentioned that, he's coming from a team that really leveraged SQL in doing their own analysis.
Right.
And it sounded like some of these tools, they give that flexibility to where, okay, like you're on our platform and we're going to give you buttons to push and give you the insights you want, but you don't have the total flexibility to write SQL and do queries. And Dan mentioned that about Heap, that they had that capability. He wasn't necessarily using all that, I don't think, but he was doing some experimentation stuff. Yeah, so it's interesting how they work themselves through full query, full access to be able to run your own analysis, or whether they actually deliver insights to you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And what you mentioned about Andrew also reminded me that question about build or buy. Because it seems like the previous company where he worked, they decided to first build this type of product analytics system. And then they got Pendo, but they got Pendo for their onboarding. So they didn't utilize all the analytics in the that Pendo had in its most power. So the question here is, why would companies spend quite a bit of resources to build their own product analytics versus buy one that already exists? There might be a lot of good answers to that. Some of it could be licensing pricing. Some of it could be legacies. Privacy is another thing that actually I want to touch on in a second. You're right. I mean, privacy could be one of them as well, especially for highly regulated
healthcare, stuff like that.
Yeah, healthcare or banking or things like that. But some of it could be that they, develop it on a legacy system. That it also depends. I think it goes back to the point that we talked about before about raising the event in your application versus using the interface of the analytics system to raise the events. And that was one of the things that I experienced in the past with Pendo, but I'm sure Heap has the same type of thing. If your application is built in a way that you cannot uniquely identify an element on the screen or across the screens, you will have problems raising those events. So when a developer does it through the application, it's definitely the feature that you're trying to raise. And there is no issue there because they put it specifically in the place where you want to raise it. But if you do it through the product analytics system and you use HTML tags or CSS or something like that, if the application was developed in a way that this CSS is used across several places and you want to raise it across the application, or if the element does not have a unique identifier, you may not actually raise it properly, and you may get information from some other features. That is something really important to look at when you implement a system like Pendo or Heap, because again, I'm not sure about Heap. That needs to be checked over there. Yeah. But in general, you really need to make sure that it's being raised properly, because otherwise you do get the wrong information. Cool. So let's talk a bit about privacy, because you're absolutely right. Privacy is a really important point over here, and I think Ken touched on it a bit. That he said they don't send any PII information to Amplitude. Even the ID of the user is like a hashed number that no one really understands. So when they looked at Amplitude, they don't really know what the information of the user is because they don't need it over there. From my experience specifically on Pendo, because you're using in-app messaging and you sometimes want to personalize them to the users. So you want to put a message on the screen and say, hi, so-and-so, etc. then to do that, you do need to send their name. So, so you could actually send more information into those applications. It really depends on the implementation, how you do that. It's interesting because they don't really pick up the data that people enter in the fields, which is definitely, if they would, that would be definitely a data issue. So they only track the events of what people used. But if someone entered their name, password, date of birth, they fill a form with all of this information, they actually don't, at least I know from Pendo, but I'm sure all the others as well, they don't pick that data. So none of this data is stored anywhere on their system. But then also, if you want to identify them with their email address, it's up to you. How do you do that if you do send that email over to that other system or not? I do know actually that Pendo released a feature recently, I think it was in 2020, where you could pick up specific data from a field, but they put a lot of security around it. So not every user of Pendo can actually set it up. You have to be an administrator, and then you have to explicitly turn it on, and make sure you even sign a special, it's not terms of use, but it's a special thing that said that you did it on your own. It's not them that decided to pick up the data, but it's you. So there is no issue there. There is some value in that, because sometimes based on the specific value that a user entered, especially let's say it's a drop-down list and they choose a specific value, you might want to do something based on that. So there are some use cases where you might want to really do that. But that means that they do collect that specific data once you tell them to start collecting it. With systems like Mixpanel and Amplitude, you don't need any of that, because you will tell the developers, if a user picked this value, raise this event or do something different. So you have a much better control over that.
Okay. And I'm wondering how that plays in with marketing. I guess the marketing aspect of it, that's where the data privacy probably, because you're going to be sending personalization out through marketing probably more so than the product analytics space. Plus, you have to think about just the general partnership with the company. I think that plays into it too, because not only are you have your own privacy concerns, but their own internal privacy concerns. So just developing that bond.
Yeah, all of these companies are very reputable. They all have this, privacy policies, and when you go through your due diligence with them, they will provide it, etc. And I'm sure all of them are hosting on reputable clouds like AWS or others. Yeah. So usually these things are not an issue, but this is where you really have to also speak with their other clients to see if there were ever issues. And this actually leads also to, what type of organization they are. And we heard from all of our guests that they all really love the companies that they're working with. I didn't hear any concerns over there from anyone.
Yeah, I wanted to point that out. That was a really good positive thing. Every one of them mentioned how they had a good relationship to sometimes a great extent. I know Ken highlighted his relationship with Amplitude because he's a heavy user of requests and stuff. So, but they all seem to have a positive interaction and experience with them. So that was something that was really positive to hear, because as you've mentioned before, they need to be focused on their customers as well, have a relentless focus. Not only are we focusing on our customers, but they're focused on their customers as well. Yeah. That was positive to hear.
We didn't, by the time that we are recording this episode, we didn't yet release the Amplitude episode, but talking personally about our podcast and how each one of the companies reacted to it, I think that so far it's just 3. I think it was good as well, although only one of them reposted our original post.
Yes, thank you. Heap.
So, Heap was that. Heap. But that could be also because, we are growing slowly, and they're the last one that we released. So maybe the previous ones either didn't see it or etc. But that was nice to see from Heap. So just a shout out to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even Mixpanel liked Jan's post or something like that. So they were involved on LinkedIn too. So I think Mixpanel got involved too. So that was good to see as well, that they were reaching out and being supportive of that. So yeah, that was nice to see as well.
Yeah. Any other insights for you, Matt, that you would like to share with everyone?
Yeah, I don't have any other particular insights. This was extremely beneficial. I think starting this off, as I was saying, I really was thinking, okay, Heap, Mixpanel, Amplitude, Pendo are all probably going to be very similar in what they're doing. But coming out of this, I can see the differences. I can see where they have market fit and where they're trying to serve their customers in unique ways. That may be they're trying to serve the product manager with Amplitude. Someone with Mixpanel, they may be trying to help the product analyst and allow for more ad hoc querying. And not knowing a lot about Heap, coming out of the conversation with Dan, it was really informative on Heap, insightful knowledge around Heap. So it was interesting to see that coming into it, didn't know so much and didn't know the differences, but I think we learned a lot from it, and it was really beneficial to me personally, for sure.
Cool. Yeah, I also really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to our next themes and categories to talk about. We have quite a bit of them. I have a long list of things we should talk about. Just call out for our listeners. We would love to have you on our podcast as guest for different products that you're using. So we'll be reaching out on LinkedIn. We'll have some surveys about which themes you would like to hear about, and also who's using specific products. So don't be shy, contact Matt or myself, and we'll love to have you on our podcast.
Absolutely. Please send any kind of feedback. It's all welcome. We're hopefully going to be delivering the content that our listeners are looking for. And, like we talked about this when we originally started, this is a product. We're developing it every day. The feedback from the listeners is going to be beneficial and really going to help steer us in a direction that's going to help everyone in the community for sure.
So it was another great episode, Matt.
Absolutely.
Hopefully everyone have a great day.
Yep. Everyone take care. Thanks for listening to Product per Product, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.